Hello and welcome. It is Vintage Super League time. Championship match queued up for you. It's going to be Steve Menendian against Luis Scott Vargas. I got Bob Maher with me here for the beginning of the festivities. How you doing, Bob?
I'm doing great. I can't wait. I mean, there's only one chance to be the first champion. So,
That is a great point. One of these guys will go down as the first ever Vintage Super League champion, and it's fitting to me that it's Luis and it's Steve. I think that since in the history of the league, one of those guys has been in first place every single week. And since about week 4, it's basically only been Luis and Steve in first place. Steve started out with a nice solid 4-0. Luis passed him, Steve passed him back again. But the two of them have basically been trading off first place for the entire season. So I don't know. Strikes me as a fitting final.
I completely agree. It's kind of pitting the best of the vintage players of the kind of contemporary Pro Tour players versus one of the best vintage players that we brought into the league, with both Steve Menendy and Rich Shea coming in. I mean, it's a very interesting just battle to see the two of them going at it.
Totally agree. So you got a pick for me? The Hall of Famer or the vintage superstar?
I think I have to go with the Hall of Famer. I mean, I think you should have to stick with your own, but it could go either way, and I think either one is a deserving champion. So I'm really just excited to watch the finals. More than anything, I hope there's swingy games, and I hope it goes 5 matches.
Yeah, I think it goes at least 4. I could easily see 5.
Yeah, let's look at I completely agree.
Yeah, let's look at the deck list actually, because I think it's pretty interesting the way these decks match up against each other. Luis has, essentially a Gush Fastbond deck, and both of these guys are actually on Gush decks at the heart of things. Luis's, though, is essentially creatureless. He can tinker out a Blightsteel Colossus, but that's all he's got going on Game 1, and most of his Game 1 wins are going to come with Tendrils of Agony. He's going to Gush, Fastbond, just cast 10 spells in a turn, point Tendrils of Agony at Steve's face, and drain him for 20.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, both decks have 4 copies of Gush. But yeah, LSV's most likely path is the Tendrils.
The key thing about LSV's deck, though, is look at that sideboard. Look at the transformational Oath of Druids, Grizzlebrand, Forbidden Orchard plan. That is there specifically because he expected there to be a lot of Delver in the playoffs. Treasure Cruise has been doing great ever since Cons was printed. Treasure Cruise had a spectacular weekend at Eternal Weekend, including in the hands of Steve Menendian, who had a deep finish, didn't make top 8, but did quite well. That was the deck that Luis was expecting. He and Eric Froelich worked together and came to very similar conclusions. So they wanted to have a transformational Oath of Druids package to just blindside anybody that showed up with Delver.
But on the flip side with Steve Menendian, I don't think he obviously won't be blindsided having access to the deck list, but he's also the type in a control matchup to take a lot of the creatures out of his deck. He's shown us when he's played Delver in the past that in a control matchup, the Delvers come out. He's working very much off of his Young Pyromancers, or in this case, Young Pyromancers and Trigon Predators, that he's going to feel like he has Oath locked out of the game plan before his creatures see the board. And the difference between only being able to bring in 3 Forbidden Orchards instead of 4 may come into play here.
No, that's a good point. I definitely think Steve's going to be ready for this. It's funny. I was on Twitter today. There's a really interesting conversation with Luis. I was just doing the kind of hype thing, who you got, Luis or Steve. And Luis's take on the matchup was that the most likely person to win is whoever Luis manages to target with his Ancestral Recall.
Yeah, absolutely.
You look in the middle column here, Steve Menendian, 2 copies of Misdirection in his main deck.
Huge supporter of Misdirection. I mean, it preaches its value and has been very effective at redirecting, in particular, LSV's Ancestral Recalls so far in this league.
He's done it 3 times, right?
Yeah, even in their playoff,
Yeah, these guys did have a tiebreaker match to see who would get the 1 seed. They both ended the regular season on 6-3. We can actually show the bracket and sort of remind everybody how we got here. Back in that first week, in addition to Dave and Eric playing their quarterfinal match, Luis and Steve did play a tiebreaker match, and it was Steve that got the advantage there, and in large part because he managed to misdirect Luis's Ancestral Recall and draw 3 cards instead of letting Luis do it in both of those games.
Right, and that was what blew me away, was that he pulled that off in both games.
Yeah,
It's just tough to do in Vintage.
Yeah,
But that's why you play with those cards.
he is Mr. Misdirection. Although interestingly, when they met in the regular season, Steve did pull off again a misdirection of Luis's Ancestral, and Luis managed to win that game anyway. And it was Luis that took the regular season match.
But even watching replays of that match, I've watched a replay of that match a number of times at this
It was
point.
a
I
good
mean, it
one.
was incredible. I mean, it was just such a reason to watch this series, to watch the replays of this series. If you want to watch super high level Vintage being played, some of those replays are truly incredible. I've learned a lot about Vintage just watching those replays, and I think LSV has taught all of us in the league a lot about Vintage just in the last 10 weeks.
Totally agree. So Luis losing to Steve, he did have to beat Eric in the semifinals, but now, yeah, we get, I think, the final that we were all expecting or at least anticipating. So you got slight edge to Luis here. Is that more on deck matchup or just the Hall of Fame quality skills that he's demonstrated over the years?
Oh, I don't know if there's a real edge. You asked who I was pulling for, and I guess I just kind of had to pick one.
Okay.
I'm not sure either player here truly has an edge. If you were to throw nine different formats at them, I believe LSV would have an edge. But Steve is such a Vintage specialist. I don't know that anyone in this league can get much of an edge on Steve just playing Vintage.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. At the same time, I think the deck matchup does favor Luis. I mean, he'd rather have Oath of Druids for all of the games, but that Oath of Druids just gives him, it just makes it so hard for Steve to actually win the game. There's this 2-mana threat that if Luis can resolve it, I don't really understand how Steve's supposed to win from there.
But, well, he wins with the 3 Grafdigger's Cages, and Luis only having 2 Nature's Claims and an Abrupt Decay to get him off the board, and the Nature's Claims often run into Mental Misstep. You'll see him protecting those Mental Missteps after board.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's just going to be very interesting. I mean, I guess you can Hurkyl's Recall also, because you really only need to Oath once. But, no, it'll be really interesting. I can't wait. We've gotten such positive feedback from all the people when we were at Eternal Weekend, when people were at the GP last weekend. We've had such incredible outreach from the fans. I'm just excited to give them the finals here.
Yeah. No, me too, for sure. I can see that the guys are assembling. They're getting set up in Magic Online. Should not be more than about 5 minutes now. You have any other big picture thoughts on the season or looking forward to season 2?
I'm looking forward to season 2, but I'm actually still in awe of season 1. More, like I said, from the fan outreach. The number of people who have messaged me on Facebook or the Twitter post I've seen. The number of people who came up to us at Eternal Weekend. I think Lenny approached both of us, and I signed my first Black Lotus. I don't know if that happens to you very often, but it certainly doesn't happen to me very often.
It has happened to me a grand total of 1 time, and it was at Eternal Weekend. Yeah, that was. I should have taken a picture of it. I'd never signed a Black Lotus before, but I did. Did we sign the same one? Was that guy just collecting?
Yes.
Yeah.
You signed it. I signed it, and it was signed by Richard Garfield, I believe.
Nice.
And beyond the person whose Lotus we signed, fantastic guy. I believe he drove out from Colorado Springs. Just an Eternal player. Yeah, Lenny. He's I believe a linguist in the Army, but
wow.
Just an exceptional guy. And the number of people who've come up to tell us how much they love Vintage Super League, and are just incredible people. I've really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed being at Eternal Weekend. There really are just some of the best Magic players to be around at that event, and the feedback from everybody in the league has really impressed me. It's made me really happy I made the commitment to be part of this.
It's nice to hear. I certainly had a hell of a fun time myself. I think, yeah, playing's been fun, hosting's been fun, watching the matches has been super fun too. This one, again, I think will be a good one. I mean, if anybody in the chat has any suggestions, by the way, we're certainly interested in ways to make season 2 better. I feel pretty good about season 1. I feel like things went, better than I could have hoped, honestly. So I think we're in a good spot to just kind of run it back.
We were drawing for a 7-way tie for 4th going into the last match of the last week. I mean, there was a lot of suspense. There was a lot going on. There was a lot for people to pay attention to. There were a bunch of storylines. It was probably better for everyone that it ended up being a clean break for the top 4, and we didn't have to play umpteen breaker matches. But that also would have been interesting. But I think it was a great sweat to get to watch it up to that point.
Yeah, it was pretty insane. I see Steve and Luis in Magic Online setting up the match. I just want them to start, and I just want to watch. Who you guys got out there in the chat? We should get a straw poll going. See whether Luis or Steve. I don't know. I mean, the bit that I've been watching on Twitter and whatnot seems pretty split between the two of these guys. I mean, they've both got their fans and they've both got their admirers.
Yeah, and boy, I mean, I think a lot of the old school vintage players, I think, almost have to be rooting for Menindian. He's been around forever, previous vintage world champion. But we also stream this on Twitch, and LSV is one of the most entertaining characters on Twitch. I love watching whether he's drafting or whatever format he's playing. Remember, in the middle of the night one night, I was playing a goofy legacy deck that was like bring out a Grizzlebrand on turn 2, and I just looked up right before I turned 2 to LSV, and I think it was just a 2-man queue or something, and I killed him on turn 2 in game 1, and I went to message him in Magic Online. I'm like, are you streaming right now? And before he even had a chance to answer, like 4 people texted me, a couple people messaged me on Facebook, and I was, okay, yeah, you're streaming. And he's just that entertaining. It can be the middle of the night. He could be playing whatever goofy format that doesn't really matter to anybody at the time, and people just watch, and it's a blast.
Yeah, definitely good times. Wow, yeah, I'm watching the chat, and it is again pretty split. Maybe Edge LSV, probably Edge LSV, but
it's hard to go into any situation and not give a slight edge to LSV. I'd be playing casual, playing in a draft, playing on the PT, playing in Vintage Super League. He's just an incredible player. That where I said I don't necessarily see Steve getting a leg, or anybody getting a leg up on Steve in Vintage. I don't picture anybody getting a leg up on LSV anywhere.
All right, looks like these guys are getting into the game. Awesome. Let's get down there. Now, to remind you guys of the format, they are playing best 3 out of 5 matches. So we could see as many as 15 games of Vintage between these two guys. Their decks, they'll reset to game 1 for each of the matches. I mean, it is best 3 out of 5 matches. Each match is your normal best 2 out of 3. So we'll be tracking the match score here. You can kind of see the spots there. It's going to take 3 different match wins to claim the Vintage